I'm Bob. I'm from Carlsbad, New Mexico, and you're listening to The Wild Idea.
Welcome to our conversations for a wild and connected world, what we like to call the Wild Idea Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Bill Hodge, and along with my co-host, Anders Reynolds, we bring a deep passion for wild places and wild ideas that live at the intersection of wild nature and human nature. And together, we also bring a 30-plus year track record of fighting for land protections, fighting for land stewardship, and super excited that today we'll be joined by Martha Williams, who has worked her career on public resources as an educator, solicitor, and most recently as a director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service during the Biden administration. Martha will join us from Maryland, just up the road from my partner fighting for wild places, Anders Reynolds. Anders?
Oh, hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm staring at a lot of snow. I'm ready. It's going to be I think a snowy winter here in Northwest Montana. So
I'm kind of jealous. I like the snow. I wish I got to see more of it.
You can come plow my snow if you'd like.
Never mind. I hate snow. Bill, you and I have been having a blast sharing all these screenshots we've been getting from listeners and friends, sharing with us their Spotify Wrapped results. And for those who don't know, Spotify Wrapped is sort of this marketing campaign that Spotify, the music listening platform, puts on that allows users to sort of view like a compilation of data about their activity, the stuff they've been listening to over the years. And, you can share it on social media. And we've been getting screenshots of that with folks who have The Wild Idea, as their top podcast. But I kind of want to I hope you're okay with this. You shared with me your top 5 songs, the 5 songs you listened to most this year. And I would have never expected these to be your 5 songs. And are you okay if I share these?
Well, as long as the audience recognizes that you're totally making this up, but sure, go ahead, share.
Bill, don't get embarrassed now. Listen, let's just read them out. There's nothing to be ashamed of. This is
okay, let's hear it.
The Spotify share. It's like total distilled what you do in private, because you sort of forget they're monitoring it until the end of the year, and then you see, I can't remember. I didn't remember listening to that song so much. But okay, we'll just do the top 5, okay, and we'll start from 5 and we'll go up. So your number 5, your 5th most listened to song was Linkin Park's "Numb." I can hear you listening to that in the car, in the truck.
Okay.
You love that song. Okay, yeah. Number 4, your 4th most listened to song. This one threw me a little bit. The theme from Cops. You're just listening to that?
Bad boys.
Yeah. That's what you're listening
gonna do when they come for you. Bad boys. It's so fun for me because I'm hearing these for the first time myself, folks. So
there's no need to be humble. This is good. It's letting people learn a little bit more about you. Number 3, Sinead O'Connor's "Nothing Compares to You." You do love that song.
Yeah, I do.
I've heard you listen to that one. Okay, number 2, your 2nd most listened to song is the theme from Cops again, but this time it's a Kids Bop version.
I don't. Okay.
All right. And number one, and this is probably a lot of people's number 1, is Reba McEntire's "Fancy." I like that. That's a good top 5, Bill.
I haven't thought about that song in a long time. I wish I'd noticed that this is where you were going to go with this, because I would have loved to have written out your top 5 for the year too. So, oh my. Now I'm going to have an earworm throughout this entire conversation, this important conversation. In my back of my head is going to be going, bad boys. What you going to do when they come for you? Goodness gracious. What fun we have. But I think it's time we probably get a little more serious about this. Martha Williams joins us today. Martha most recently served as the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and previously served as the director of Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. She's also been an academic advisor to some of my favorite conservationists here in Montana. Martha, just what a treat it is to have you on the Wild Idea podcast.
Thank you, Bill and Anders, for having me. But I have to admit, I'm still laughing. Anders, from the beginning of that, and I had a Department of Interior playlist that I was always working on. And my favorite icebreaker question was, what would your walkout song be?
Oh, that's great. What was your answer?
Well, it depended on my mood. It totally depended. Sometimes it was Just Breathe, Willie Nelson. Sometimes it was River, although I had to be careful. And I had to pick kind of PG rated words. So that makes it a little more difficult. No More Buffalo, James McMurtry. I love that song.
Great song. What a great choice. Anders, what would your walkout song be?
Oh, I've thought about this often, and I have like a direct answer I give to everybody. It is a song called Straight Lines by Silverchair, which I don't know if you've ever listened to Silverchair. They were big in the 90s, and then again in the 2000s. They've always been big in Australia, but I love that song. It gets me amped every time I listen to it. What's yours, Bill?
I'm after. Well, it's Bad Boys, of course. It's what you gonna do when they come for you? It would probably be it would be a song from Railroad Earth. I'd have to think about it. Jupiter and the 119 maybe. So also probably a song that very few people know, but is a great song from our house band, if you will, Railroad Earth. So. Well, all right. Well, let's get into a really important conversation. Martha, back a couple months ago, I got to hear you deliver the keynote address at the fall gathering of the Glacier 2 Medicine Alliance. I, of course, made a beeline to you after the speech to ask you to come on the podcast. And once again, thanks for being willing to say yes to that. One thing stood out to me in that presentation, and that was just some of your remarks on the Endangered Species Act and your commitment to species recovery on the land versus, what shall I call it, our obsession with the listing or delisting battle. Do you think the Endangered Species Act has become more of a political football than effective tool? How's that for a hard one right out of the gates?
You make me so glad that I spoke at that. And I always wonder, do I speak very effectively or not? Because I really care about wild places and wild things. It's sometimes hard to, one, contain my enthusiasm, and two, be really frank and effective. So I think this question goes right to that. I mean, listen, I have been on the record for saying I'm a true believer in the Endangered Species Act, unequivocally. So on one hand, I think it's been incredibly effective. It's just had its 50th anniversary. It has been instrumental in preventing so many species from going extinct. That said, I do think maybe it's from working as a state director, working for state Montana, and for the feds, for the Fish and Wildlife Service. I have really little patience for the tussle, the fight over listing versus delisting, rather than talking about what a species really needs to recover and what people really need to live with that species. Grizzly bears might as well jump into it. Wolves are perfect examples of that.
Martha, we've been really lucky to have so many threatened species experts on this podcast. We had Tim Manley come and talk about grizzlies. That was episode 7 for anyone who'd like to go catch up. And we had Katie Schneider talk to us about wolverines, which was episode 10. And Malcolm Brooks touched on mountain lions on episode 35. But you're really the first guest we've had who could really address the systems and the policies our nation has decided to use to protect these species. And I know Bill just jumped right into Endangered Species Act, and I'm glad he did. But I wonder if we could just back up and you could just do a little level setting for our guests. How do we even make these decisions, and why is it important? And what are the opportunities and challenges that work is facing today, both from the management perspective and maybe from the advocacy perspective as well?
Great question, Anders. And yes, when I used to teach, I think I would spend a semester on the question as opposed to doing it really quickly. First off, I think people are so used to talking about a specific species. So wolverine, ridiculously cool. Grizzly bears. I know Ben Goldfarb talked about crossings and all the amphibians that need to get across the road too. So the point of that is that we in this country are really lucky to have this intricate system for caring for stewarding species and the land and the habitat that they depend on. So to think about it, the states typically manage wildlife in this country. It's only when those species are in trouble and end up needing to be listed as threatened or endangered, and we can talk about that more, or whether they're migratory birds because we have conventions and agreements with other countries on them, or the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species. When they're in trouble or really elevated, that's when the federal government gets involved. But otherwise, it's really up to every one of us as Americans, as individuals, to landowners, to industry, to the states, to steward these species into the future. And then when there's concern, as there was, if you think back to the 70s, when the Cuyahoga River was on fire, when we were losing the bald eagle, when we were losing these species that we always thought would be around, when there was smog that you couldn't see through in Philadelphia, or there was an oil spill in Santa Barbara, Congress stepped in and said, wait a minute, if left unfettered, we can really get into trouble with pollution and also decimating species. And we need some policy in this country that says, look, we think this is part of our national heritage. We are stronger as a nation when we step in and make sure species do not blink out on our watch. So that's what happened in the 70s when Congress passed almost unanimously the Endangered Species Act that says, look, we all have a responsibility to make sure that species stick around and that we recognize the land and waters they live in. We have to pay attention to those too, to make sure that these species don't blink out. I mean, that's the catalyst that I don't think we can forget as we move forward. And what does that mean today, 50 years later?
You know, as someone that has served in a senior leadership role at the state level with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and at the federal level as the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, do you see real opportunity to get the protection of threatened and endangered species right if we can just solve that push-pull relationship between the states and the federal government? I kind of get at some level, people don't want to let go of control, right? I guess at some level, the state is letting go of control, whether they have the ability to let go or whether that control is taken away from them. But is that where the solution lies, is quitting to stop looking at it as a push-pull, like who's responsible for this species, for example, and instead look at it as where do we work together to maybe forestall listing, even as an example, right? I mean, is that where the solution lies, is in that push-pull?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it leads me right to the concept of RAWA, or Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And that you have to think about what motivates the states to manage these species so that they don't become threatened or endangered. And most states, their primary mechanism of funding, which was brilliant and also limited, is their focus on game species, because that's how they get their money from the Pittman-Robertson Act, Dingell-Johnson Act. The money comes in from excise taxes on fishing, tackle, gear, hunting, equipment, ammunition, really primarily. So, and then you think of the way wildlife is managed in this country, primarily by the states. I should back up. In the US, nobody owns wildlife. It is held in trust for all Americans. It's something that's collective for everyone, which is really remarkable. And so the states manage the take of wildlife, big game primarily, and that's how they get their money. They also have the responsibility to manage what we call non-game wildlife, the species you don't hunt or fish for. But they don't get the money to do that well, hence so much of it falling to the Fish and Wildlife Service. And listen, I would argue, I think most state directors, if in a room by themselves, would say by and large, the relationship with the Fish and Wildlife Service or with NOAA is generally really good. And we work very hard, both the states and the feds, at making sure we're working through issues together and that we do have a good working relationship. But where the tensions come up, exactly, Bill, is in the species that are listed and the states want to manage them, and or where the species are in need of some help and the states really don't want them, management to go to the states. It's the turfiness that is a problem. And then I guess I would add to that what I have seen over the years. I really felt this, especially when I was in Montana in dealing with wolves and bears, is I would say, gosh, if we're in this headlong rush to delist any species, are we prepared to manage them? And or I don't want to make any false promises to the people in the state that once delisted, everything is going to be fine. I mean, the reality, you're going to have the same issues. It's a matter of having the money and the people and the experts on the ground to help those who live with those species, help them cope with it. And that shouldn't matter whether it's Fed or the state. The focus should be on conflict management and how do you help people live with them so the species is around for a long time.
That's great. Thanks. I want to bring up something you and I have discussed before that's a follow-up to all that you just shared there, and that's the idea of how violently the pendulum can swing between administrations, and particularly, for example, the battle over listings and delistings. And that pendulum swinging has become so dramatic. It swings back and forth in such violent ways. Do you have thoughts on how we ever reduce the radicalness of that swing of back and forth? Because it seems like it would make the job of the actual people on the ground trying to protect these species or manage game species so that there are still species that are out there for the sportsman community. But do you have any thoughts on how we reduce just how violent that swing is of the pendulum?
I've thought so much about that, Bill. And I think there are a number of factors at play. One, I guess you have to believe in government, the value of government and the people on the ground who are helping the species, helping the landowners navigate management. I think of at the Fish and Wildlife Service, our mission started with working with others. We could do nothing on our own, nothing. We did everything with so many partners, not just the landowner or the industry, but all the NGOs and the states and the tribes and local governments. It's such a collective effort, as it should be, that I think there first has to be a realization that this work is best for everyone, the community, when you have people on the ground. So when I think part of the tussle is when you cut those positions, when you take people away from it, who's handling the really nitty-gritty hard work that makes coexistence with wildlife work for people. So one, I think it's you fundamentally have to believe in the value of these roles and these people who are, honestly, they're public servants. They're serving our country and they believe in what they're doing and they believe in serving others. Then I think too, I think we all have a role to play in the swing of the pendulum. I mean, I did too. I think even in the Biden administration and working on the ESA regulations, what I think happens is when you have this political swing of the pendulum, people get so focused on positions. The position of the regulation, the position of, I don't like the Endangered Species Act. And people stop talking about the interests at heart. So I think if we can focus on what's the interest, is it to make sure long-eared bats are around because they're critical pollinators and we need them? Is the interest also in making sure certain development can continue? And how do we make that work? That seems to be much more productive, and where we've been able to have those conversations where we're talking about the interests, I think we get more done. But it's the positions that make people so hardened. And I think an excellent example are the most recent Endangered Species Act regulations that go right back to the ones proposed in 2019, 2020. So we're like right back where we started, and then bring in something like saying that harming habitat isn't something that the Endangered Species Act was meant to address. So then you've got this position that only, I think, brings in the battle more, instead of saying, hey, you know what? We want to make sure that certain energy projects go through and that we have a streamlined way of doing it. Let's talk about that. Instead, the solution gets thrown out and we all fight over that.
That was a very great, I think, well thought out way to answer that question, Martha. And I'm going to try to not add to the reflexivity, if you will, and contradict my desire to stabilize the pendulum swing. But the current administration is, like you said, it's seeking to go back to, defining the change in habitat as not causing harm to species, and to negate, for example, cumulative impacts.
They're not going back. That's new. We've never been there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would be helpful for our audience, for you to, maybe for the layperson, to define the term harm, maybe in the sense of the Endangered Species Act and why it does apply or doesn't, but why I think it maybe applies to habitat. Like, you can do harm to a species when you degrade the habitat, right? But maybe walk our audience a little bit through what harm means, because what is going on is, this redefinition of harm as it relates to the degradation of habitat for species that are threatened or endangered.
And so this allows me, Bill, to back up a little bit on what you asked earlier, Anders. How does the Endangered Species Act even work? And because Congress said, look, these species are so important to us as a nation, we want to make sure it's the responsibility of the Fish and Wildlife Service and all of the federal government to make sure these species stick around. So once a species is listed as threatened or endangered, which means they're could go extinct, disappear, blink out, either really soon or in the foreseeable future, you can't take the Endangered Species Act, the hook or the teeth says you can't take a threatened or endangered species. And what then the statute says is take means you can't harass, you can't harm, you can't pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or even attempt any of those acts. You can't do that. And so the question becomes, well, if the Endangered Species Act says we want to protect these species and we want to provide a means to conserve the places that these species depend on. Does harm mean hurting the habitat, destroying the habitat, which then destroys the species? And I think anybody who understands animals realizes if you destroy where they live and or you destroy their food source or their security, you're destroying that species as well. So that's the way the Endangered Species Act, we've implemented the act since it started 50 years ago. There's always been discussion about what does harm mean or not, but it has always applied to destruction of habitat. These new regs try to say, well, no, we're just talking about if you directly kill the animal, habitat doesn't have anything to do with it. So that's the big change. And I think in any of us who've been in the natural world, like it doesn't, I don't mean to be mean, but like it's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense to me. How could you say, well, manatees don't need clean, warm water to exist?
So to ask you a question about habitat, if climate change is reshaping where animals can live, and if we are saying that protecting habitat is akin to protecting species, do we need to update our laws, our policies, so they match what's happening on the ground because of climate change today? And relatedly, do you see an opportunity, for the Fish and Wildlife Service maybe to shift towards more big picture habitat focused conservation, right, rather than fighting species by species?
I think that's a tricky question, Anders. I think it makes a ton of sense. And now we know another piece of the Endangered Species Act is that if you undertake, people can take some threatened or endangered species if they have a permit to do that. And one way to get a permit to do that is to take these conservation actions where you're helping the habitat or the ecosystem, and in the process, some species may get killed. And that happens across the country. There's been more of a focus on multi-species ecosystem programs of helping the whole ecosystem, which is this complex web of the natural environment. And so if you help the ecosystem, you presumably help all of these species. That's great. And yet, there are still some species that need even more of an extra nudge or help to survive. Some, for example, I thought this was fascinating. We worked on Hawaiian forest birds when I was the director at the Fish and Wildlife Service. So with climate change, mosquitoes are moving into higher elevations. And with going to higher elevations with climate change, they carry diseases that kill these forest birds. In Hawaii, many Hawaiians see the birds as their ancestors. They have this totally, talk about connected, they have this totally connected, as many indigenous people do, connected view of nature. And so when mosquitoes were starting to kill these really amazing honey creepers and the alala, all these crazy, interesting birds, the question became, do we remove some of them to a zoo to make sure they don't disappear, work on the habitat and bring them back? And many Native Hawaiians at the time are like, no, you can't do that because you're taking our ancestors from the places where they belong. And ultimately, through a bunch of efforts of releasing sterile mosquitoes while working on eliminating the mosquitoes some of the species also are in a captive program so that they can be re-released and can be around for when we have done the work on the ecosystem and the habitat. Does that make sense? So yes, you can cover a whole bunch of species. We should be focused on the habitat. And yet sometimes you need to do even more.
That's a fascinating answer. It also reminds me to revisit something you mentioned earlier, because, ecosystem management like that would take a lot of staffing, right? And I think people don't realize how understaffed and underfunded the wildlife agencies are. Maybe you could share a little bit more about what that looks like on the ground and maybe what can't get done because the agency simply doesn't have the capacity right now.
Well, the Fish and Wildlife Service, my understanding, just like many other federal agencies, has lost 20% of its staff since I was director. And we were lean. We were lean when I was there. If anything, we had a capacity problem, how to do our work well with so few people, given the responsibilities Congress and the American people gave us. It's not like we were making the work up. People elected members of Congress, they passed these laws and we were bound to deliver them. And for good reason, because it helps communities, it helps with human health, it helps prevent flooding, right? It helps with clean water, it helps with recreation. There's so many benefits to doing this work, benefits to people and communities, and the economy. So the Fish and Wildlife Service manages national wildlife refuges. Over 500, I think there are 572 now. Every state, every territory, millions of acres of lands set aside for specific species, for specific purposes, unlike any other component of public lands. How do you take care of, manage that, steward that land with being so threadbare? We had some refuges that didn't have employees. There wasn't somebody showing up in the white truck to say, hey, can I help you? Do you know where you are? Did you know there's a long-billed curlew that just showed up last week? Do you know we've had a bear here? Whatever. And then I think to realize, I think people forget these federal jobs, gee whiz, they're great jobs. I think about Montana, a federal job was plum. And those people were our neighbors. We went to the grocery store with them, right? We shopped at the same place. They were part of the economy. And we forget about that. Those are really good jobs we should be wanting. And that those people serve our country. They're patriotic, right? That's how they show up. So to think that there's a benefit to cutting these positions is hard to understand unless, did anybody go in and show some curiosity to say, hey, what's your mission? Why is it important? How do we help you do that mission and do it really efficiently? I think that those are the questions good leaders, good managers should always be asking. Why do what we do? Why does it matter? How do we do it the best we can and as efficiently as we can? And until I think we get to, I think back to the fundamental question, do you believe in government? Until we get back to saying, what do we want to do to help this country? How do we do it well? Then I think you can talk about the people and where to put them, and who doesn't like having really good people on the ground in the communities where we live.
Yeah. Do you believe in government, and do you believe in the work happening on the ground? And that sort of takes me back to Bill's point about the pendulum swing, or as you described it in an earlier answer, this sort of tussle back and forth on, for example, listing and delisting as administrations change. But I do think it's important to note that while the politics does swing, the science doesn't, right? Like ESA listing decisions are built on scientific assessment and peer review. Those biological facts don't change every 4 years. And I mean, as you know, probably better than anyone, species recovery takes, it happens against the backdrop of decades, right? And so I guess, I want to make my question, how can advocates better make that argument to decision makers that are in charge?
I have an idea on that, Anders. I have an idea on that. I think that somehow, and maybe it's our political system, we've forgotten the long view. We've forgotten the long game, right? So we're in these immediate tussles, and I understand why. But to put out, this is why this work matters. This is why government employees doing it matter. Because the science doesn't change, because having these healthy wildlife populations actually help prevent pandemics. They help with clean water, with clean air, that we have no planet B. We have the moral and legal responsibility to take care of where we live now, that you don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. You don't squander your future by these immediate needs. So that's what I think. We make the case. It is up to us to say this work matters because it makes the place where we live, Earth, more worth living here. It makes our daily lives better, and it's our responsibility to do this work. And if you just want to come in and take the resources for the money and not realize there are all these other components to it, then shame on you. That doesn't mean you can't still do. You still can develop. You can still do the work. You just might be a little bit harder. You do it more deliberately. And that's what the Endangered Species Act does. The heart of it is Section 7 that says when the federal government uses federal money to undertake an action, it's the responsibility of those agencies, not the Fish and Wildlife Service, for the federal agencies to make sure when they take that action, they're not going to cause a species to blink out. So when Federal Highways puts in a highway where those amphibians Ben talked about cross the road, you know what? It's up to them to say, gosh, if we move it a quarter of a mile, we won't have that problem. Why wouldn't we?
Because it makes too much sense, right? Because we seem to not,
because it's work.
Right. We seem to not do the things that make the most sense.
Because we're too busy fighting over our positions.
Yeah, and fighting over whether we're worried about the wealth of today versus the wealth of forever for all of us, right? That you just kind of alluded to. I think one final sort of heavy question is, and this is something we explored when we had Malcolm Brooks on and talking about management of mountain lions in California and how it became a ballot box decision instead of a decision. And it goes back to this question about what do we invest in our government for, right? And I think one of the things that I believe we fundamentally do is to provide the experts that can make sure that the science is driving the decisions. I'm curious in a quick answer, like how you view making sure that the public can be heard on important issues, but not just turning over an important decision about how to manage a predator species like mountain lions, like we talked to Malcolm Brooks about. But how do we gather the public input while also recognizing that there are people who are experts in the issue at hand? And how do we balance those two things?
I think when there's controversy over nature or species like mountain lions, it's a good thing because it brings the species to the fore, brings the consequences of our actions to the fore. So at least it's a conversation and that people care. So I think that's in some respects a win. I think we live in a world right now where we've lost foundational facts. It's really hard. You have to have trust in the process and the science and the people saying it to lay those foundational facts. So I think that's something that I wish I knew better, but I think your credibility and integrity is all you have to stand on, right? And you always have to work on that. It takes decades to build it and a second to squander it. But so you build that credibility. You do include people, and then you're right. At the end of the day, someone does have to make the hard decisions. And, there's a process to litigate it, to challenge it. If the rule of law stands, there's a way to go through it. But I think it's a challenge, Bill, but I also think it's a little bit of a gift, and that you get people to care. Doesn't make it easy.
It doesn't, but I think that is important. We want the public to care. We want the public to think about the things that matter to them, because they obviously inform the government. The government is us, right? But we also need to then trust in the government that we have created to have the folks who can follow the law, follow the science, and make the right decisions. Martha, this has been just such a great conversation. Really loved having you on again. We've been speaking with Martha Williams. She's the former director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and just such a great voice for all of our natural world. And I just want to thank you for coming on and having this important conversation with us.
Yes, Martha, thank you so much. You were so clear. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Thank you, Anders and Bill. And I'm such a fan of the Wild Idea. And I think it's really exciting to be able to elevate all these different voices. So you've inspired me.
Well, thank you for being a part of it and being one of those voices. Coming up on the Wild Idea podcast, we have a conversation with Sarah Francisco, who went from a childhood growing up on a Christmas tree farm to fighting for the forests of Appalachia. And we make some year-end resolutions with our friend Michelle Fulner from the Golden State Naturalist podcast. If you like the Wild Idea, we hope you'll do two things besides subscribing, and please do subscribe on your podcast player of choice, but give us a review, and we hope you'll take a minute to recommend us to a friend or a colleague or whoever you like. And if you want to go deeper into what we're doing here, sign up for our newsletter at thewildidea.com, and we look forward to seeing all of you on Down the Trail.
The Wild Idea is a production of Wild Idea Media and hosted by Bill Hodge and Anders Reynolds. Production and editing by Bren Russell at Podlad. Digital support by Holly Wilkaszewski at Daypack Digital. Our theme music, Spring Hill Jack, is from Railroad Earth and was composed by John Skehan. Our executive producer and ringleader is Laura Hodge. You can find The Wild Idea wherever you listen to or download your favorite podcast. If you have a minute, please take a minute to give us a rating. And if you really like us, we hope you'll subscribe. Learn more about us at thewildidea.com.